Okay, some of the questions that we had in regard to this was really getting a better understanding of what nutritionists actually do. So I guess by way of a little bit of background into how our nutritionists work with our athletes, they do one-on-one consultations, they do group sessions. They're basically there on the end of a phone at any point in time whilst our athletes are either based in Australia or on their way travelling overseas. So they basically sit down with the athlete and look at what they're eating, what the demands of their sport are, give them advice on their daily training diet, so what they're consuming on a day-to-day basis, how much they should be consuming, and then what sort of combinations. They'll also then talk to them about how they should be recovering based on the demands and durations of their individual events or sports. They'll actually consult with them on hydration and what, I guess, makeup that their hydration plan should encompass. We do sweat testing at the BIS. We have a heat tank permanently set up. We'll bring athletes in, we'll collect a sample of their sweat under certain environmental conditions, send that off to analysis, and that'll let us know what volume of sweat the athletes are losing and what level of sodium content they're losing in their sweat, and that allows us to then tailor their hydration strategy around both volume and content as to how much sodium they should be including in that. They also give our athletes a lot of advice with regards to supplements. It's fairly topical at the moment, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on in the presentation. They talk to their athletes about the actual competition diet. So you may have a standalone event, such as a game of hockey or a game of netball, but then there are also multiple events. So track and field, where you may have an event, you take a break, you have another heat, you take a break, you come back for the final. So the strategy is about how they prepare, not only leading into the competition, but on the day of competition, and as I mentioned before, the recovery afterwards. We also have a lot of athletes travelling, so our dietitians will work specifically with them based on the areas that they're going to, in terms of what sort of foods they're likely to be able to access whilst they're away, and perhaps what level of supplementation they might need to take with them, just to ensure that their diet is as balanced as possible, given the potential restrictions around what sort of foods they might be able to consume. Back here, they work very closely with our athletes on planning their menus, so how much, what combinations, what types of foods, all those sorts of things. They'll work out a shopping plan for them based on their lifestyle, both from their sport point of view and then outside of their sport, to make sure that their food is fresh, that it's diverse, and that they're getting all the nutrients that they need, etc. And they'll actually also run cooking sessions to teach some of our, particularly our younger athletes, who are perhaps just starting out on their own, some basic cooking skills so that they don't get home and go, well, it's too hard to cook something up that's going to be healthy. We'll help give them those skills to enable them to ensure that they are getting the correct level of nutrition. Okay, by way of a brief overview, I'll start with some discussion just on carbohydrates, in terms of how much and the types. We'll then look at protein, again, how much is the right amount, where those sources of protein are, and when you should be consuming those proteins. Bit of a discussion on fats. We'll move into vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and the topical of supplements, and then finish up on some discussion around hydration. At any stage during the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to sing out, put your hand up, interrupt me. I'd much rather be directing my presentation to your interests and your inquiries than standing up here, verbally downloading a whole lot of stuff and having you go, well, that didn't answer the question that I was looking for, so please engage. All right, carbohydrates. The very big question of pasta, and should it be on the menu, on or off the menu? Carbohydrates really are the fundamental building block and energy source for all of us, and in particular our athletes. They're stored in the body as glycogen, primarily in our muscles and in our liver. That glycogen is then broken down into glucose, which is transported around the body and provides us with those fuels. During exercise, it's used up quite rapidly, depending on the intensity of the exercise, and we only have a very limited store of it. So we can't go away and say, yep, that's fine, we can just survive on what we've got. We need to constantly be refreshing that and replenishing that. And it really is essential for our endurance, concentration and recovery. It's basically a substrate that's important for both our skeletal muscle contractions as well as our central nervous system. So very important for our cognition and our motor skills. If we're going into an event and we start depleting our stores of carbohydrates, our decision making and our coordination will suffer as a consequence of that, because glucose is effectively pretty much the only source of fuel that the brain uses. So if we're not getting the glycogen breaking down to glucose, getting into the blood, circulating around the body, our brain's effectively being starved. Okay, so it is very, very important in our lives, and particularly in the lives of athletes. Okay, its role, as I mentioned, is primarily an energy source, and that's particularly the case during high intensity exercise. It gets burned up and utilised very, very quickly, and our carbohydrates are our most readily accessible source of energy, and that's why they get used up first. It affects our metabolic mixture in that it spares protein. Okay, so having an adequate build-up of carbohydrates, reserve the carbohydrates in the body, preserves our tissue proteins, okay, which are otherwise used in maintaining our muscles, and then post-exercise, actually repairing our muscles and growing them. So we basically want to ensure that we do have that store of carbohydrates to protect the rest of our protein sources of our muscles. It's a metabolic primer. So when we're exercising, if we have insufficient reserves of carbohydrates, we need to go then, if we burn those up, we need to go to an alternative energy source. Okay? Now, fat is an alternative energy source, but it's very slow to be broken down and utilised. For those of you who know, your low, slow endurance sort of exercises are your fat burners, okay? Because your body doesn't have that immediate demand for energy, so it can take the time to break down your fats. If you're exercising at any sort of intensity and you run out of carbohydrates and have to resort to fats as a fuel source, our body doesn't have the opportunity to effectively break those down. Okay, so that's not a good thing. Finally, as I mentioned, it's a fuel for our central nervous system. So in terms of having our body and our nervous system operating functionally and allowing our brain to be fueled adequately for our coordination, motor skills, decision making, all those sorts of things. Okay, what are our carbohydrate foods? Okay, carbohydrates really should supply about 70% of our total daily calories. These are predominantly come from unrefined, fibre-rich fruits, grains and vegetables, as you can see in the picture here. Unfortunately, modern diet ultimately means that with a high level of processing that a lot of our carbohydrates actually come in the form of simple sugars, such as sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. These are not good carbohydrates. Okay? There are effectively 4 types of carbohydrates, and as the name suggests, carbon and hydrate, that they're made up primarily of carbon and water. The 4 types are monosaccharides, which are our glucose, fructose, galactose. Disaccharides, which are the simple sugars, so sucrose, lactose and maltose. Oligosaccharides, which are in vegetables, particularly seed legumes. And polysaccharides, which are plant-based, which is primarily starch, and fibre, so which we get from roots, stems, leaves, those sorts of things. Okay? It's important with some of the diet fads that are going around at the moment. You get low carbohydrate, high protein, low carbohydrate, all sorts of things. A no carbohydrate diet is never anything that someone should engage in. Okay? They are our primary fuel source, and there should always be some level of carbohydrates in the diet. Okay, so unless we're getting our added carbohydrates between our training sessions, our glycogen is going to decline and we're going to get fatigued in suboptimal performance. So as coaches, strength and conditioning or technical, tactical coaches, that's not good. Okay. You hear foods spoken about in terms of their glycemic index, which effectively represents the rate of absorption into the body. And then there's a term that spins from that glycemic load, which is looking at the quantity of the carbohydrates that have been consumed, and the glycemic index, so the rate that they're consumed. Where you are consuming an excessive number of high GI carbohydrates, that can alter your metabolic profile in terms of the way you're breaking those foods down and absorbing them, which if you're working with someone who does happen to be a little bit overweight, actually increases their risks of disease. Based on that, research really tends to suggest that eating a high carbohydrate, low fat diet is probably the most effective in reducing overall fat levels, and it actually has been shown to increase the fat synthesis in people who are overweight. Now, not all carbohydrates are created equal, and as suggested by the glycemic index, the digestion rates of various carbohydrates are quite significantly different. So your low fibre processed starches and simple sugars get into the bloodstream very, very quickly and at a relatively high rate, whereas lower GI, slower release, enter the blood system over a period of time. From an exercise point of view, you can see that there are probably times when both of those foods are important. Pre-exercise and during exercise, I guess, I was going to say supplementation, but boosting, you're looking more for the slow GI, low GI, so slow entry into the system, carbohydrates as a form of energy. When we get to the point of recovery though, and particularly where you've got an event that might have multiple events during the course of the day, we've got a limited amount of time to recover, and we're really looking then perhaps, on a short-term basis for some high GI energy foods, because they're going to get the energy into our system just that little bit quicker. Okay? It's when people are basing their diet around very high GI foods that you get problems with type 2 diabetes and those sorts of things, because effectively you're then dulling your insulin response because you're getting this constant high flow of sugars into the blood and the body can't cope, and it effectively dulls your reaction to it. Alright, so high GI is not bad, it's just that there's a time and place for it. This is effectively, I guess, what we're looking for, in that we have our training bout, we use up our supply of glycogen in the muscles, it drops. Then based on our diet is how quickly that supply is restored. We exercise again, replenish, exercise again. Now you can see obviously with a low carbohydrate diet, we're in a diminishing pool of carbohydrates. And accordingly, we're going to start running out of energy and our performances are not going to be as good. So you really need to be looking for that higher carbohydrate diet, particularly with athletes. Inadequate carbohydrates, we've sort of touched on this, ends up in fatigue and lethargy. As part of a recovery protocol, poor recovery, which then means poor preparation for the next either training session or competitive performance. We've obviously got to reduce training capacity, as I mentioned. Important for the central nervous system, so it can lead to impaired concentration and decision making. You can become quite irritable, and there are other obvious problems there. Okay, this is just a little bit of a guide in terms of your carbohydrate intake based on grams per kilogram body weight per day and the level of activity that you're doing. So you can see there, if you're at the top of the table with 1 gram per kilogram, you're really not going to be doing very much at all. In fact, you're going to probably be struggling to do very much at all. You get down to the bottom part of the scale, and these are athletes that are going hard over long periods of time, repetitively. So they're burning their carbohydrates consistently at a fairly high rate, and obviously they need to replenish them. Has anybody got any questions at this stage, or something I haven't covered that they want more information on?
Could we just get a copy of this as well?
Okay, I should have said that earlier. The way these seminars work is, and the reason for the video cameras is that these videos will be uploaded onto the website together with a copy of the slides for you to be able to go back. It generally takes about a week or so to get them up. At the end of the seminar, you will also receive an email from me inviting you to join an online community of coaches who have been to these seminars, and I've been posting information and web links and those sorts of things about where you can find more information about the topics that have been presented across these seminars. So don't think you need to sit here madly writing. All of this will be available to you in about a week's time, and then there will be more information on the community website that I will invite you to post-seminar. Okay, moving on. All right, carbohydrate requirements. Now, this really depends on the size of the individual. As you'll see, everything is basically grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per day or per time allocation. So in terms of maximising our muscle glycogen, we're really looking at 5 to 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight per day. That's our overall diet. If we're doing a long training session, okay, we can boost that a little bit. So in the hours leading up to our activity, 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrates, again, per kilogram body weight. If we're, that's all well and good before, but when we're halfway through an Ironman, we probably want a little bit of a boost along the way. So where you're exercising for a prolonged period of time, again, boosting just 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And these are all guidelines, they're not exact numbers. And then in terms of recovery, we've got to get some carbohydrates in there relatively quickly, after the exercise or the competition's finished. Okay? So, for example, if you have a 50 kilogram athlete, just very quickly, in terms of maximising their glycogen stores, you're looking at 250 to 500 grams of carbohydrates. Okay? For enhancement, you're looking at 50 to 200 grams in the time period before. Okay, your additional is the same, no problems there. And from a recovery point of view, we're looking at 50 grams plus. Okay, now, whilst I'm talking, I'm just going to actually hand these out. I should have done this before. Just take one and pass them around. This is a bit of a carbohydrate and protein counter, just in terms of what foods contain what levels of the two. And you can use that as a good guide. If you're looking at these periods, obviously the maximisation of across a whole day, probably not so relevant. But in terms of enhancing fuel immediately before, maintaining your energy during, and recovering afterwards, there's some good little snacks there that you can mix and match, because your athletes are all not going to like the same foods. They're going to have different tastes. So this will just help you talk to them about what they can be doing to improve their performances and their carbohydrate intake. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
With that, how you said that during the event it should be low GI stuff. Those gels and stuff that people take, like if you're on a bike or whatever, are they usually low GI or are they more high GI, the gels?
Again, it really depends on, the gels are reasonably high GI.
Yeah.
They're designed to get into your system really, really quickly. What you'll find with those though, is that you'll spike very quickly and you'll come down very quickly. So it'll give you that little surge, but it will also wear off. Yeah. So by all means, use those, but you might have a gel and a banana. Yeah. So you get that spike, okay, it gets you up and going, and then hopefully the banana starts to kick in and just gives you that lower GI, then, drip feed of energy across the next period before you supplement again with some additional carbohydrates.
Yeah. Timing is very important to those things.
It is, yeah, very important. Okay, adequate carbohydrates. Okay, this obviously is a very individualised process. You're not going to get your 13-year-old gymnast sitting down next to your 25-year-old Ironman and give them the same plate of food. Okay, so it really is very individual. So, you know, when you're talking about diets, you know, don't let your athlete sit down and go, well, that person's doing this, therefore, you know, I should do the same. It's not necessarily the case. Okay, talk to them on a one-on-one basis. You can talk broadly to them as a group, but even within that group, within the same type of athletes, the same sport, they're going to be different sizes. They may have different positions on the field, which have different energy demands. So it's really important that that's the sort of situation where I would suggest that you get a sports dietitian to actually come in and work with the larger group, because you can't give them a blanket, you know, nutritional advice. It does need to be individualised. Okay, so our tips for achieving adequate carbohydrates, obviously including a carbohydrate-rich food at every meal, breakfast, lunch and dinner. Snack on carbohydrates. This is where you're exercising. Don't snack on carbohydrates if you don't need to, because any energy you don't burn gets stored as fat. Okay? When you're out training, you've got a heavy day or a long session, make sure you supplement. And some of those snacks on the sheets that went round are the sorts of things that you want to be having with you, or having available for your athletes. And afterwards, obviously, recover with some carbohydrates, because you need to get those back into the system as quickly as possible. How much is enough? Well, as coaches, you're probably some of the best people to identify whether there's a change that needs to happen. You might not know exactly what that change is, and this is where I would refer you back to a sports dietitian. But you'll notice, you know, how your athlete's performing. You know, you've set the prescribed training. They should be advancing. They should be getting stronger, faster, bigger. Are they actually achieving that? If not, why not? You know, if you're doing everything right at your end, what are the other factors that sit out there that sometimes, you know, you don't get to see? You might see what they snack on when they're at training, but you don't get to see what they eat when they're at home or school or work or anything else. Have a chat to them. You know, if they're going through a period where they're a bit flat, generally they're good but a bit flat, perhaps their life's just a little bit hectic at the moment. Kids might have exams, you know, they're not sleeping well, they're not eating well, and it's coming through and it's showing in their training. Okay, if they're not recovering, they might still be training well, but geez, they're still flat 2-3 days after. You know, perhaps it's their recovery eating, and we'll get on to recovery eating in a minute. And what's their weight like? You know, if they're getting a good, balanced diet that's providing them with the resources to undertake their training, realistically, unless they're going through a massive hypertrophy phase and they're putting on muscle bulk, their weight should be relatively stable. Or, yeah, obviously, if they're children, they could be going through a growth spurt. But you understand what I'm saying. Their body type shouldn't change significantly. Talk to your athletes. They're going to know. Encourage them. Talk to them about what they're eating, and encourage them to say, well, hang on a minute, I'm not feeling as good as I think I should. You know, that's the first sign for you to start talking to them a little bit more, and as I said, perhaps referring them to a dietitian. All right, very popular, lollies. Particularly in kids sport. We see coaches all the time with a bag of snakes coming out, or you know, jelly beans or whatever it is. Pros and cons. Okay, when we're aiming to recover, we want to restore our glycogen, we want to replace our fluids, we want to repair our muscle damage, and we want to maintain our nutritional status. Okay, so that's just not in terms of competition recovery, that's recovery from training as well. So this cycle goes on all of the time for every session. Okay. In terms of recovery, obviously we've got looking to restore our glycogen. 1 to 1.5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram body weight as soon as possible and every 2 hours post training and competition. Okay. In the early stages, as I mentioned, we go to some high glycemic index food. Okay, we've got to re-establish that base level of glycogen as quickly as possible. Okay, just for proper function. All right. Once we've got a base level in there, we can prop up the rest of it with some slower, lower GI foods. Okay, the window of opportunity for replenishment is generally 3 to 5 hours post the event. Okay, but there's an additional rapid uptake phase of 1 to 2 hours post event. Okay, so if you can get some glycogen in there, or some carbohydrates in there, your uptake in that initial window is far greater than it will be if you delay.
Some nutritionists recommend 30 minutes, and they say the window is 30 minutes. What do you think? You really get 1 to 2 hours? Because I stress with my athletes, I would say 30 minutes is very important. You've got to stick to 30 minutes, but there could be a lot more relaxed if I now tell them 1 to 2 hours.
Okay, your uptake window is 1 to 2 hours, but I agree in terms of an initial dose.
Yep.
Get something in there in the first 30 minutes, and that's what I mentioned in one of the earlier slides.
Yep.
That if you can get that 1 gram per kilogram body weight in the first 30 minutes, you really are kick-starting the process. But that quick uptake phase continues for that first hour to maybe 2. Okay, your window of opportunity then still continues for 3 to 5. But the further away you get from the finish of your exercise, the slower that uptake's going to be. All right. So you want to maximise it when you can. Otherwise, you're playing catch up. So if your athletes delay and the other athletes get started straight away, your athlete's playing catch up. Okay. And particularly where you might have a late afternoon or an evening session. You know, to be able to, sometimes it's hard to, go home, have a shower, cook yourself a meal, that sort of stuff. So get a high GI snack in there straight after training. It doesn't have to be big, okay, but if it's high GI, it does get that into the system quickly and gets that process started. And that way, hopefully, then when they supplement that with some lower GI stuff when they get home, they're not going to bed on that sugar high that you get from high GI. You've got some slow-release, low GI foods in there that are going to get into the system while they sleep. They should wake up the next day right and ready to go. Obviously there's a bit more supplementation that's still going to need to take place. They still need to be consuming carbohydrates, but you've got that window and you've got as much in that time as you can that's then allowed their body to replenish the stores.
I think you find probably one of the easiest ways and attractive ways, certainly post-competition, is liquid form drink. A protein carbo drink straight after they're generally a bit dehydrated, they're looking for a drink, and they'll take it. They don't feel like a meal. They don't feel like a meal. You can't. They don't want to have it. Protein carbo drink, and they'll drink it. No, that's fine. And that settles them. You can have your meal an hour later if you need it.
The 30-minute window after exercise, no more for protein intake.
Sorry?
You know, is the 30-minute window is now for protein intake in order to avoid the cannibalization of our muscle. Where the carbohydrate can come in the next hour and a half, 2 hours.
Generally, the advice is that actually you should take a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Okay, because they've found it through research that by consuming them together, they actually work well to absorb even more rapidly into the body.
Oh, even if you are much more sugary, protein are so much better.
They generally say, I think it's like 50 grams of carbohydrates to 20 grams of protein post-event. Okay. Right, back to the question of lollies, which are all too often consumed immediately after, and jelly beans are an extremely high GI source of carbohydrates. Easy to consume. The kids aren't going to argue with them if you hand them some lollies. They're going to, as opposed to, here's a ham sandwich. The issue is that there's not a lot of, there's no protein in there and not a lot of other nutrients. So they're not nutritious, and it's very easy then to overindulge. Okay? We're not looking for an ongoing source of high GI. We want a little bit to get the process started, and then we want to move to lower GI, slower release sources of carbohydrates. So yes, use them, but monitor it. It's got to be managed, particularly, as I said, when you're dealing with kids who are all too happy to grab a whole big handful and just keep going.
Just for the kids, more and more people talk about just have a chocolate milk. Would that be a better option for them than the lollies? Because then you have carbohydrates and protein and something that
Post-event? Absolutely. Yeah. Post-event.
it tastes good for them as well. And
It is. So it's got the carbohydrates in there. It's also got a little bit of protein. So it is a fantastic source of recovery. Subject to the age of the kid and the sport that they're playing. Sometimes they don't tolerate milk immediately after exercise. And this is where you can go to lollies. I don't know too many kids that don't say no to a handful of jelly beans or some snakes. You know, you get them down out of that first sort of 30 minutes, they have a shower, they go home, you know, you sit them down, they've calmed down, they've cooled down a little bit. You then say, here, have your chocolate milk. That sort of process. But every individual is going to be different. You know, some kids might love coming straight off the field and having a chocolate milk. Other kids won't tolerate it that well. So it's a matter of getting to understand your athletes and being able to tailor and put together some sort of combination of recovery food that they're going to actually embrace. Because the hardest part of this is you can say, we've got all this amazing, fantastic recovery food. If they don't like it, they're not going to eat it. Okay? It's that simple. So it's got to be something that they're going to embrace. Okay, some moderate to high GI foods, which give us that 50 grams that we were talking about. Large ripe banana and 2 cups of watermelon. Tropical fruit, low-fat creamed rice, jam sandwiches, honey sandwiches is another one that's good. Yeah, rice cakes with honey there. Fruit and grain bars. So these are the sorts of easy, I guess, mainstream types of foods that people are going to have around, that kids are going to be used to. They're used to seeing them. It's not some weird and wonderful concoction that they are going to regularly engage in. Okay, moving on to protein. Should we be eating more protein? It seems like every second shop in a shopping centre these days is some shop selling enormous great tubs of protein powder and every other concoction under the sun. Realistically, do we need it? Subject to who we are and what we're doing, maybe, maybe not. Okay? We're really looking, I guess, to get into protein, where we're looking for that amino acid oxidation. Okay? 1 is a source of energy, but 2, protein is a building block for our muscles. So we want that protein in to repair and to grow. Okay? That's where we're really looking for our protein. Again, rough rule of thumb, 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram body weight per day. Okay? If you're not doing anything, you're not taxing your muscles, obviously it goes down. Alright, again, that's a very broad rule of thumb, so don't go applying that to everyone. It's sort of a starting point and you negotiate it from there based on the training and the activities that the individual's engaging in. Okay, our protein foods. We've got our milks, our chickens, fish, grains, protein enhanced products, eggs, legumes, beans, those sorts of things. In terms of the amino acids that we're talking about, you've got your essential ones, which are the ones that the body can't synthesize, so you can only get them by consuming them. And probably eggs are one of the best sources of those essential amino acids in a natural form. Okay, so meeting our protein needs. Here we go. Our lean red meat, poultry, seafood, dairy, eggs, as I said, your beans, so legumes, tofu, nuts and seeds, and dairy. Realistically, most athletes, through a balanced diet, well and truly meet their protein needs. Okay? So when athletes walk in with that great big protein tub, my first reaction to that is warning. What are they doing with it? And why do they need it? And do they honestly, realistically need it? We've had the high protein diets, you know, low carbs, low fats, all that sort of stuff. Again, you know, with a lot of the proteins, so particularly the meats, people don't understand lean when they see red meat, and there's naturally a higher level of fat. If you're consuming excess of it and you're not burning it, it's going to get stored. It doesn't, you know, if you go and eat a great big tub of protein powder, you don't suddenly look like those blokes in the slide a couple back. You've got to actually do something with it to turn it into that. If you're filling, the other thing is too, if you're filling up on protein, you're less likely to be consuming adequate levels of carbohydrates. Okay, proteins are, you know, very, very filling by their nature. You can also, and again, this one's probably a little bit beyond my knowledge, it can also have an impact on the fluid and calcium losses. So realistically, for healthy athletic individuals, you don't need excessively high levels of protein. A naturally balanced diet should see us getting the protein that we need. Okay, time to eat protein. Mentioned before, essential as a recovery tool. It's the building block of our muscles, and they're the things that most often get damaged when we are exercising. May not be significant damage, but there is damage there that needs to be repaired. If we're going through a hypertrophy phase, we need the protein coming in to actually build the muscles. Okay? Milk is a great source of this, and we mentioned the chocolate milk as a recovery. You've got your carbohydrates in there, but you've also got your proteins. And cow's milk is a better alternative than soy. But for some people, that doesn't work, so soy can be used. Okay, again, things we can be doing in terms of recovery for protein and carbohydrates. Your milkshake, which we talked about, a liquid meal supplement, your low-fat cheeses on bread. Now, again, depending on the time of that, immediate after, you want a higher GI, so you go for a white bread. Okay? If it's a little bit later on down the track, you're more low GI, you're looking for a whole grain, something that's going to go into the system a little bit slower. Breakfast cereal with milk, obviously baked beans on toast, fruit, yogurt, and protein powders. Protein powders are convenient, but again, they've got to be managed. You know, you don't necessarily need to be woofing into a great big tub of it. Okay, in all of this, where does fat fit in? It can get a bit of a bad rap sometimes, fat. And getting back to this next slide is the issue that I had about kids in recovery. How often is that the menu at the canteen, at the footy oval or the athletics track, or, you know, they rock up and it's, can I get a pie or a sausage roll or a couple of dim sims or a chocolate bar or a packet of chips, whatever it is. Okay, there is a role. Fat is very important in our diet. Okay, but again, it's got to be managed. Okay, it's very high in kilojoules. It is a source of energy, but it's not our preferred source, particularly where we're exercising intensely. Okay, fat is a source when we're going for a brisk walk. Okay, moving about as our daily activities, those sorts of things. Not good for high intensity stuff. Anything you consume that you don't use gets stored as fat. And dietary fat is obviously very easily stored. The body goes, yep, you beauty, I'll just tuck that one away, save it for later. Obviously there's a range of long-term health problems associated with fat. Again, if we're eating too much fat, we're probably not eating enough quality protein and carbohydrates. Again, there are different types, and the type of fat is the key. Saturated fats are the bad ones, and unsaturated are the good ones. Now, the thing we need to be careful with that is that our saturated fats tend to come from animal sources, unsaturated tend to come from plant sources. So we probably all go out and buy olive oil, margarine, and these sorts of things. Margarine is what they call a hydrogenated fat. Okay? So it changes, vegetable oils and plant oils are liquid based. As soon as you start getting something that's solid, it gets less appealing from a health point of view. So by hydrogenating a vegetable oil, it turns it into a solid form, and then it starts to behave like a saturated fat. Okay, so olive oil margarine is still better than butter, but don't think you're getting away with it. You can do whatever you like if you're consuming olive oil margarine or anything like that. Okay, because if the higher the level of hydrogenated fats, that also serves to increase your low density lipoproteins, which is your bad cholesterols. Okay, low fat important, no fat is not recommended. It is does play a very important role in our diet and in our bodily functions. It supplies the essential fatty acids that we need. A number of vitamins that our body needs are only absorbed through fat. So we need them, the fat, as a transport for those vitamins. No fat, no vitamins. And actually improves the taste. You know? Let's face it, that bacon fry-up, you know, who can resist that? Okay, everything in balance and moderation. That's what we say. Omega-3. It's a bit of a buzzword. Everybody's been talking about it for a few years now. Okay, there are a raft of benefits that they have researched and found based around omega-3 fats. So your heart, eyes, brain, bones. From an athlete's point of view, there seems to be benefits with regard to inflammation and also an anti-arrhythmic effect on myocardial tissue. So where there's stresses on the heart, omega-3 actually serve to stop the fluctuations in rhythm. I don't understand the mechanics of that, but the research tells me that that's what they found. Okay, in terms of sources of omega-3, our fish, shellfish, salmon, sardines, bluefish, mackerel, all those sorts of things. They actually listed sea mammals, but I don't think too many people are going to engage in whale eating or anything like that in Australia. Dark leafy green vegetables, so and flax, hemp, canola, soy and walnut oils are all good sources of omega-3. Okay, it contains cardioprotective elements, hence the anti-arrhythmic effect on myocardial tissue. Protein is not present in fish oils. Okay, so you're not doubling up there. The omega-3 and the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids are essential fatty acids, as I've said. Where they're essential, we can't synthesize them within the body. We need to actually consume them. Okay, so omega-3 is important to be consuming because we can't create it out of anything else. Okay, getting more omega-3. Fish oil tablets and fish oils. A lot of foods now have omega-3 added, so our milks, breads, etc., eggs have been fortified with it. So again, if you're not into fish tablets, there are other products that have been fortified with it. In terms of reducing our fat intake, again, so I talked about the hydrogenated fats. Our olive oil margarine is still better than butter, okay? But don't think you're getting off scot-free because you're not having butter. There is still a price to pay there, okay? When you're going out for takeaway or out to a Chinese restaurant, go the plain steamed rice as opposed to the fried rice with all the extra bits and pieces in it. Again, when you're out at dinner, go the tomato-based pasta sauce rather than the cream-based pasta sauce. Cooking with minimal fats and oils, and obviously those that are better from the appropriate seeds and plants. Trimming all visible fat from meat. Okay, so you want the Jack Sprat approach to life here. Low-fat dairy products, takeaway foods, and snack foods are all pretty much high in fat. So try and stay away from them.
Can I ask you a question about the hydrogenation part of
Yep.
the fats? Is that when it's becoming solid, or is it the same thing when you put it oil in frying and vegetable oil? When it heats up, is that the hydrogenation process started?
No, I actually had a note there about the hydrogenation process. And it's basically when you're turning a liquid oil into a semi-solid. So that's your lard substitutes and your margarines are hydrogenated. Supplements, very topical at the moment. So starting off on vitamins and minerals, because that tends to be why we supplement. There's no recommended daily intakes for athletes. It can really depend on what they're doing, what their sport is, what the training load is, and a whole range of factors. The principle that we effectively adopt is food first. If you can get the vitamins and minerals through food, do it through food. Okay? If you look at the definition of a supplement, it talks about adding something to complete something. Okay? So you can talk to them taking something past a certain point, but if you look at it from that point of view, you supplement to add something to complete something. So in terms of our diet, supplement to complete the diet, not to then extend the diet. Would be I guess the starting point if people are talking to you about, should I be supplementing? Particularly at those younger levels, because really, again, food first principle, they should be able to obtain everything they need through a natural balanced diet. Okay? Now there will be exceptions to that. So if they've been ill, or they've been injured, or potentially they've been through a period where they've been away and they haven't been able to get a well-balanced diet, you may supplement them when they, as they recover or when they come back, to get them back to where they should be as quickly as possible. But once the balance is restored, you don't need to take it any further. Okay, the body has a fantastic way of maintaining its homeostasis. Okay, sometimes we can give it a little bit of a hand, but we should be able to get everything we need through our diet, in most cases. Okay, where our diet is inadequate, obviously, and there are some health conditions which make it hard for individuals to maintain various levels of things, by all means, supplement then. Again, if there's an issue, it should be under someone's supervision. They shouldn't be walking into, a health food shop and coming out with a great big bag of bits and pieces that, under the guise of them restoring their, levels to a natural point. Okay, and be really concerned with any excesses. Obviously, again, it's not taking the past, we're not trying to turn them into superhumans. We're just trying to get them to where they should be naturally. Okay, so in terms of that, you go back to the food pyramid: fruit and veg, dairy, meat, fish, whole grains of cereals, and variety. Let's keep it as interesting as we can, and then we're more likely to take part in it. If we keep given the same thing to eat every day, regardless of whether it's balanced or not, we're going to start looking elsewhere. It's going to get boring. There are that many foods out there. Let's just get out and enjoy them all. Moving on very quickly, because I'm conscious of time. Hydration is the last one I want to cover off on. There's the rule of thumb with regards to 2 litres per day, plus what we lose in sweat. Okay, we're losing fluid all of the time. Sitting here now, you are losing fluid. You are very slowly dehydrating. Okay? We need to be replenishing that constantly, and that's where the 2 litres comes in. If you're then going to go out and exercise, you're going to lose more. Okay? Drink to thirst. Thirst is often a very poor indicator of hydration status. That when we feel thirsty, that's the body really telling us, hang on a minute, I'm starting to get desperate here. Will you give me something to drink? Rehydration should be an ongoing process all of the time. You know, get your athletes to ensure that they're starting training well hydrated. Okay, if you've got an early morning session, we'll tell our athletes on the night before, between that 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock period, drink 1 litre to 1.5 litres. Okay? You've then got a couple of hours to get the excess out of your system before you go to bed. You should have an uninterrupted night's sleep, and you'll wake up in the morning perfectly hydrated. Okay? Try and aim to get your athletes starting every day that way. Okay? Then they're not playing catch up. They're not going to get to a session and go, oh, you're not going to get much out of me today. I'm already dehydrated. You know, it doesn't take much in terms of dehydration to actually start impairing your functional and cognitive abilities. It's only 2% loss of body weight. Okay, which is not very much. Is that a question?
Are you saying that's an additional 1 to 1.5 litres to the 2 litres per day?
Probably does. If you're going to drink 1 to 1.5 in the evening, okay, if you've already had 2 before then, you're probably going a little bit beyond what you need. But if you've been training during the day, like 2 litres is what we should be consuming sitting around like this, you know, and standard toilet breaks and those sorts of things. So once you start training, you do need more than that. All right. So subject to what they're doing, and everyone will be different. They might say, you know, I tried that, and I was up all night. I'm not doing that again. In which case, you change the protocol for that person. Okay? We're all individuals, and everything needs to be tailored. But what I'm hoping to give you is some practical starting points that you can, you know, begin the process with, get some feedback from your athletes, tweak the process, get some more feedback, tweak it again, more feedback, tweak it again, until such time as you get them down to the system that works the best for them to ensure that they're as well prepared from a dietary and hydration point of view as possible.
Doing an endurance sport like a long cycling or triathlon, we've really found that you have to do it, and it wasn't a big thing in the past, but we have to. Pretty rule of thumb is like 750 ml to a litre an hour, and they really need to keep that up.
Yeah,
that's endurance stuff while you're on it.
Yeah, and that's not easy.
It's not easy.
You actually need to, if your athletes are involved in those sorts of sports, get them to train that way. Okay, start training them to get used to. And even with your team sport athletes and your one-off events, if you can get them used to exercising with fluid in their stomach, because it's an uncomfortable feeling when they first do it, it sort of sloshes around and you go, oh no, I don't like that. But if you can maintain a bolus of fluid in your stomach, it actually increases the rate of gastric emptying. So that fluid will get into your system far more effectively if you can maintain a little bit of a balance of fluid in your stomach. So if you, and they talk about having between 2 and 500, 2 and 300 mils immediately before, and then drinking to maintain that. So if you can keep that fluid there, it gets into your system far more effectively. If you have some fluid, then drain it dry, and you're, oh gee, I'm thirsty now, glug, 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 drain it dry again, glug, 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 glug. Your rate of gastric emptying actually becomes less efficient, because your body's going, hang on a minute, he's going to drain me dry before he gives me any again, so I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to, you know, if he's only giving me a drink every 5 hours, I'm going to make this last 5 hours. So it slows down the rate that it allows it into your stomach, allows it into your system. Okay? All right, so drink during training. Okay? So as coaches, make sure you give your athletes a chance to drink. Okay? Every time they stop, go grab your drink bottles, and then we'll have a chat about what we just did and what we're going to do next. So every opportunity, give them a chance to drink and encourage them to do so. You know, for the triathletes, as Davo said, make sure that their bottles are full on their bikes when they start, and wherever possible, if they're on a longer training ride or training session, top them up. Give them a chance to top them up. And then obviously rehydrating after training is very important. Now, you've got a Gatorade P chart. Okay, it's just a basic rule of thumb to start giving your athletes a little bit of an understanding of where they sit on the scale of hydration. Okay, and this really comes down, it's almost not so much the colour, because there's a whole lot of things that can affect the colour. So if you're going to have a Barocca, trust me, you're going to have some pretty wonderful colours. It's more the density of it. Okay, if it's light and clear and you can see straight through it, like you're looking through a pane of yellow glass, okay, you're more likely down here and you're well hydrated. If it's more like looking through a beer bottle, okay, you really can't see that well through it. The concentration of your urine is greater, which means there's less fluid content in there, which means you're more likely dehydrated. All right? So encourage your athletes to start to get to know their own bodies better. So when they're well hydrated and they're going to the bathroom, take a look. What does a urine look like when I'm well hydrated? Okay? When they've been out training all day, flogged them to death, they're more likely dehydrated. What does it look like? And then they can start to self-manage. They can go, well, hang on. You know, I don't feel thirsty, but that looks like I need to be consuming a little bit more fluid. Yeah.
And body weight. Body weight after training, after training.
Yeah, and you can do a fluid balance assessment by, as Davo said, by getting your athletes to weigh in before training. Okay, minimal clothing. Weigh in again at the end of training. Take as much sweaty gear off, because if we're weighing the sweaty gear, we're not, allowing for what we've lost because it's in our clothes. Weigh them out again. Okay, that'll give you, if they haven't done anything other than train, that'll give you a really good rule of thumb as to what level of fluid they've lost. If you use the rough guide, that 1 kilogram equates to 1 litre of fluid, which is again an approximation. So if they've lost a kilogram, they've lost a litre of fluid. All right? The rule of thumb that we then use for our athletes is if they have to replace 1.5 times whatever they've lost. Because a third of everything you consume is going to go straight through. You're not going to retain it. So if you've lost a litre, you need to drink 1.5 litres. A third of that will go, you'll get your litre back. Just again, as a very broad rule of thumb. Okay, in terms of maintaining our hydration levels, keep a bottle with you, drink all the time. People, and water is an interesting one in that you can be really, really thirsty, you can have a sip of water and your desire to drink will go away. Not because you've rehydrated, it's just the way the body works. It's gone up, I've got some fluid in me. It might not be enough fluid. So, hence, why our good friends at Gatorade come up with this product that's been very well researched, and why so many of these drinks, if you look on the back of them, they have salt in them. Okay? They have carbohydrates in them as well, but they have salt in them. 2 reasons. When we sweat, we lose salt, so we need to replace that. But when we drink something salt, we want to drink more. Okay? So it maintains our desire to drink, which, when we're trying to rehydrate, is very important, because plain water will actually dull the sensation of thirst, despite the fact that it's insufficient amount of fluid to actually rehydrate us. Again, a lot of kids don't like drinking plain water. Yeah, you can flavour it a little bit. Make it again, something that they're going to buy into. Don't give them cordial all the time, and don't give them Gatorade all the time. But you might make a weak mix of Gatorade. You might say, this time you're drinking Gatorade, next time you're drinking water. This time you're drinking cordial, next time you're drinking water. Okay, mix it up, keep it interesting, and keep them engaged in the process. Drink constantly through training, ensure your athletes get a chance to drink, and continue drinking after training. Okay, in terms of what fluid is best, take your pick. There's every single thing imaginable out there these days, in all sorts of shapes, guises, and names, and everything else. Again, this is the cornerstone. Okay? By all means, tap into these other things, but this is where you've got to come back to. Okay? There is a soft drink I'm not a big fan of in any way, shape or form, because I really don't think it gives us anything we need Energy drinks, again, there's a time and a place for them, but not on a large scale, and particularly not with children. Fruit juice is okay, but again, dilute it or alternate it. Sports drink, again, with a child, time and place. From an energy point of view, they probably don't need it. If it gets them rehydrated, okay, and that's the only way you can get them rehydrated, by all means. But otherwise you can dilute it or you can alternate it. Sports drink this time, water next time. And certainly not alcohol for the children. Okay, characteristics of all these drinks. Obviously, water is the cornerstone, fluid. They have carbohydrates, they have electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium. Again, we're losing these in our sweat constantly. Okay, sodium we're losing, but the thing about sodium, as I said before, is that it's got that saltiness to it, which actually maintains our desire to drink. Okay, which is important. And as Davo said, when you've got athletes out there for hours at a time who are going to be going through 750 to a litre an hour, that's a lot of fluid. You've got to keep them engaged in the process. If they're drinking water, they might get through half of that and they'll go, no, I don't need it anymore, I'm right, because the body's desire to drink has gone. Okay, so as I said, sports drinks. These guys have put a lot of time, effort and research into getting this right in terms of the rehydration, enhancing our fluid consumption, as I said, through that little bit of sodium that keeps our desire to drink up, giving us our carbohydrate replacements and electrolytes, and it does serve a purpose in delaying fatigue because it does keep us hydrated and a source of energy. Okay, but again, time and place. You certainly don't need to be drinking sports drink all day. Okay, in terms of the makeup, the carbohydrate in there works to actually help with the efficiency of the gastric emptying process. And again, if you can maintain that bolus, it keeps that process really efficient. Makes them taste a bit better. Plain water can get pretty boring, particularly once it gets warm. It gives us that 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates that we were talking about in terms of an endurance event and that regular supply of energy. As Davo mentioned earlier, refuelling with a liquid is sometimes far easier than refuelling with a solid. The kids need them. As I said, water is best. They're not generally working at the durations or the intensities to require such a high level of assistance in terms of their rehydration. In terms of the sodium content, if you get them drinking water and having a ham sandwich or a small packet of chips, okay, you're going to get that anyway. As I said, they're not going to deplete themselves of their energy sources, provided that they prepare beforehand and they recover afterwards. So it comes back to that well-balanced diet. Okay, the question of dental. There are a relatively high level of sugar in sports drinks. There is some research there that suggests that it does become a problem. There are some things we can do to minimise that. So reducing contact time with the teeth, that can be done through using a straw or a squeeze bottle. Chilling the drinks, rinsing the mouth with water, drinking milk, and the other thing is postpone. I don't know too many kids that would do this anyway, but don't clean your teeth immediately after drinking sports drink. It's just because it does actually soften the enamel of your teeth. And if you go and brush it straight away, it can cause problems. Give them half an hour or so, just let that enamel reharden, and then you're right to go. But as I said, I don't know too many kids that drink Gatorade and then go and clean their teeth anyway. Is the salt in there a problem? No, not particularly. There's a reason for it, as I said, it's been researched. It's not an exceptionally high level, but if they're doing it, it needs to be managed as part of their overall balance. We've got our recommended daily intake levels. This doesn't mean you get to step outside of those. Sodium fluid, again, particularly with, if you're not into the sports drinks and you're more water-based, if you marry up that with a snack, you can get your carbohydrates, your sodium, potentially a little bit of protein as part of those snacks, and that comes back to the list that I gave you earlier. Mix and match some of those to enhance the recovery and performance of your athletes. That's it from me. Thank you for your audience. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, please take down my email address, and I'm happy for you to shoot me through any questions that you have either now, or if you get home and suddenly go, oh, I really should have asked him this or that. Please send me an email. Either I'll answer it, I'll point you in the right direction, or I'll pass it on to our nutritionists and they'll get back to you.